What is the crack, everybody? Today we are going to be using the Logitech G923 that I have on loan from Logitech, and we're going to see, can it drift? Loads of people in my community are very curious about how it performs. Let's check it out. So some of you may be familiar with a settings video that I did for the G925, 27, 29 and G920. There are particular settings for Assetto Corsa for drifting, and everybody seems to absolutely love those settings. It involves generating a LUT file and all that kind of stuff, but it really makes a massive difference to your steering wheel. Now straight off the bat, I tried those settings on this wheel and they were pretty crap. So I was like, what's different? You know, it seemed kind of strange to me. So I messed around with the settings a bit, and long story short, this thing can drift, doesn't need a LUT file. Let's do some drifting. So here we are at a noisy public server, and we're going to do a little bit of drifting at one of the staple tracks of the drift scene, I guess, in Assetto Corsa, and it was always in our factor as well. We are at Tamada, or however you want to pronounce it. The main thing that we're looking at here is just how the G923 actually behaves while we're drifting. Now you can see that it's all relatively civilized for an entry-level wheel. It has a surprising amount of force, and the force settings that I'm running are actually slightly different to what I would have run with a G27 in the past, and different to what I would run with a G29, G920, all that, because I've tested it on all of them. So I actually have the minimum force set very high. It's actually at its max, it's at 30%, and it feels really good there. The most surprising thing here is that there was no LUT file generation. I didn't have to generate a LUT file. I did try it with a LUT file, and I actually got a weird kind of spiky graph, which was weird. But it with the settings the way they are right now, it feels pretty good on lock. It feels pretty good on transition, and really any kind of oddness that you're seeing is just my lack of experience drifting with a Logitech wheel again. But there's good feel, even if you try to go in backwards. There's really good feel in the steering wheel. So it's really surprising how well this thing drifts almost out of the box, because yeah, no LUT file generation, and this is just tweaking the settings in the profiler and tweaking the settings in Assetto Corsa. Let's let this car pass and we'll just try to get close, and you can see how it behaves when we try to do some tandems. So as a lot of you will know, especially, oops, he's on the grass. So really important when you're drifting, you want to have a very good feel through the wheel, especially the front tires, of course, and you want to know exactly what's going on. And surprisingly, the feel is really good. It's as good, if not better, than I remember it being with the G27, and part of the reason why it might feel so good is because of the new processor. So I reached out to Logitech and I asked them why the wheel feels so different, and I haven't actually gotten a response yet, but the only explanation that I have is that the new processor, which has a far higher sample rate, seems to be somewhat more connected to the wheel. Now this might just be my mind playing tricks on me, but I went into reviewing this Logitech G923 with pretty nostalgic eyes, and especially from a drift point of view, because drifting is where my heart is, and what I met with here is actually better than what I nostalgically remembered. So this is a really, I'm surprised I haven't, you know, played this card, because it seems like they have an ace up their sleeves. With all of the efforts that they put into marketing, they never even mentioned that anything that they've done might have an impact on drifting, and drifting is a massive market for the Logitech wheels. So as you can see, it really does react very well. I know I can feel when it's starting to straighten up. And this is not just because I've spent countless hours drifting. My drifting is a little bit rusty at the moment because I've been doing so much grip driving. But you can see that is pretty precise, and you can put the car pretty much exactly where you want it. On the wall, around a car that's sliding out. That is more than good enough for anybody who's looking to get into drifting. Don't let any... That was just me spinning out because there was a car there. Don't let anybody tell you that you know, a Logitech isn't good enough for drifting, because this is, as far as I can see, more than good enough. And well worth the 400 quid for a steering wheel and pedals. Now the thing is, you won't get a shifter with that, but you can pick up a shifter for a G920 or a G29. It's all the same shifter. You can pick them up for about 60 quid second hand, but I think they're actually only about 70 or 80 quid new. So well worth the investment. So a lot of people are extremely quick to always dismiss the Logitech when it comes to drifting, and I've been a big fan of the Logitech. Everybody kind of knows that at this stage, but this is way better than what I have been defending over the years. It's surprisingly good. There's a guy trying to overtake me, let him pass, but this is actually surprisingly good compared to even what I remember. It's a really strange one to describe. Yeah, it just feels really good. I feel pretty much everything that I would expect through the steering wheel. Important to note as well, I'm not just a sim drifter. I've owned a drift car. I've done competition drifting. So this is not just some guy who spent too much time at his sim. That's not just what I do. I have real life experience, and you know what? My G27 made me better at drifting, and this G923, I actually think it's better. I think it's better than my G27. Now my G27 might have, you know, eventually been quite knackered for all the abuse that I gave it in R Factor over the years, but this feels better, you know, aside from my crap driving, because I'm trying to think and talk at the same time. But you guys can see it's relatively effortless. I'm not really fighting the wheel. The one issue that I have with it, I guess, is it's kind of a D-shaped wheel, and I'd much prefer a round wheel. On my G27 I had swapped out for a really light fake Takata wheel, and that was great, that was brilliant, and if I was using this steering wheel long term, I would consider that as well. The only issue here is that there are lots of great buttons on the steering wheel, so I'd probably try and learn to drift with all the buttons in place, and try and you know, make the most of the steering wheel, because that little flat spot at the bottom of the steering wheel isn't the end of the world either. It's not too off-putting. I do think that it might teach you bad habits, or you might remember. I don't know. I really don't know. It kind of gets in my way a little bit. I'm not too keen on that flat spot. I prefer like a round dished wheel on it, and it just feels like the steering wheel actually has the power to power it. So the steering wheel's not super noisy. It's noisy. It's always going to be a Logitech. It's not super noisy. It's not crazy. I mean, my family's all in bed at the moment. Nobody's screaming at me about noise. I might just drop the game sound a second so that you guys can hear exactly what the steering wheel sounds like. So I've now turned off my desktop audio. There's a car coming behind me, so I'm just going to get out of the way. Here we go. So you guys are going to hear, I can still hear the game audio, but you can't on the recording. So you guys can hear the raw sound of the steering wheel right now. He just came back across the track. Anyway, it's probably a good demo of the force feedback and the sound it makes when someone absolutely clatters you from beside. Mangy up the straight, you pretty much just have to let that steering wheel go. Catch it at the right time. So my turbo is set to 80%. Could set it to 100 and it would be a little bit easier to drive this car. Where's the fun in that? Really trying to get it onto the lock stops here. It really does perform well, guys. This is so surprising. Like, watch that. I'm just like letting the steering wheel go, and you know, despite what people say, driving a real drift car, a well set up drift car, isn't super difficult. Getting into clips, getting next to walls, that's super difficult. So this gives you a bit of an indication of how much or how little noise this steering wheel makes. It's not too bad. It's not enough to wake the house, but it's always going to be a gear. Where you going, buddy? It's always going to be a gear-driven steering wheel, and it's always going to have that clickety-clack, clunky noise. Coming from a direct drive wheel, which is, you know, virtually silent. The only kind of noise that makes is when it rattles things on my rig because of the power. So this, of course, is always going to be a gear-driven wheel. So it's always going to make quite a bit of noise. But when you have your headphones on or your speakers on or whatever, you're not going to hear much of that noise anyway. So it's really a case of whether the people in your house, if you have family or roommates or flatmates or whatever you want to, whatever you have, it's really a case of whether you're going to annoy them. At 400 quid, which is, you know, relatively saucy compared to what the old G29 and G920 were selling for, it's a lot of money. But this is really because I've used True Force. The dual clutches are great. I've done videos on those, but this is the first time that I've really been kind of taken by surprise by this wheel. The reaction speed, which was always the main downfall, this is why you wanted the LUT file and stuff like that, and the reaction speed of the steering wheel is extremely good. If this was my first impression of this wheel and I hadn't heard any other reviews, hadn't seen any other marketing, or I hadn't even been told that they're the same old motors, I would be very enthusiastic about the upgrade. I think they've done an amazing job. It's so surprising. Sorry, you can probably hear it in my voice a bit. I am, of course, trying to concentrate on driving, but it's so surprising how quick it actually reacts, and how much force and detail it's actually giving me through the steering wheel. So one thing that we need to check as well, of course, is how much is it clipping, because settings are great as long as you can get a little bit of clarity. And you can see here I'm absolutely gunning it here, and I told you I've set my minimum force to 30%, which is the highest you can go in Assetto Corsa. There's little to no clipping. How I can see that, you can see the little cursor on screen just beside this green bar, which is my throttle. That's your little clipping indicator, so you can see when you go over curbs and stuff, it clips a little. But that's clipping extremely little, which means you're getting great definition through. So, because even just before my transition, I can feel when that front end or when the rear end is starting to grip up through my transition, and it's actually it's really nice. I'm super surprised by this, guys. It's, you know, I spent so much time trying to get my G27 to behave somewhat like this. This is, I would say, 50% heavier, if not more, but it's super precise. And I could, if I was like going over to a buddy's house and, you know, I had to, you know, use the entry-level Logitech for the evening, and it was this, I would be more than happy. Or if I was in a simulation center of sorts and I had to do a competition or whatever, I'd be absolutely delighted with what we have here. You can see it's, you know, relatively easy to drive. Performs. Oh, wants to do a big wall run there. But you guys can see it's relatively easy to drive, even while trying to do a video. It's performing just remarkably well. Very little clipping. They've definitely done something with the smarts. If they haven't, I'm, you know, an absolutely worthless reviewer. But you can look at that. I'm barely touching the steering wheel. It feels so like a real car when you're on the transition, and you just, like with my G27 I have to feed it. With this I have to catch it, and that's a big difference. I don't have to fling it in as much as I used to. So anybody who's ever, you know, used my system or seen me use a G27, there's lots of flicking it into the corner, but this just seems to take care of that for you during your transition. So much so that at times, you know, you really have to be on guard to catch it. But you're not. You know, the wheel isn't playing catch up with you. Like, watch this straight. When I'm mangy here, it's just really pleasant. It's really nice. So there you have it. That is the Logitech G923 and its new, I don't know, it is new. It feels new. It feels different to my G27. I cannot, you know, tell you exactly why. I would bet that it's something to do with that beefed up motor driver. It seems quicker. It could be the new Logitech Hub software. It could be just the new drivers for the wheel. Whatever they've done, even though they're the same old motors, and I was expecting to do, you know, the same old review of a G27 or G29. This is definitely the best of the bunch, like by far. No LUT file. I have very basic settings, nothing too complicated. I'm not trying to trick the wheel into doing anything that it's not supposed to do. Little or no clipping when I'm actually driving it, when I'm actually drifting it. Great feel, and just, it's really enjoyable. I'm super surprised, and I think that if you are in the market for a wheel and you have 400 quid to spend on a wheel and pedals, if you have an extra 50 or what is it, 60 or 70 quid for the shifter, do get that. You can definitely get by with just using the flappy paddles if you're on a budget, but I would highly recommend it. I wasn't expecting that. I usually tell people, go buy a secondhand, you know, go buy a secondhand G27 or whatever. They're still really good, and if you follow my settings guide, they are really good. But this is a lot better. I can't. It doesn't even have, you know, the true force stuff doesn't play a part here. So I'm not exactly sure what's going on. And I'm not sure if it entirely makes sense, but this is miles better than my G27 was. But I have hundreds of hours drifting in Assetto Corsa with a G27, and I remember that in a very nostalgic way. I upgraded to a Thrustmaster TSPC Racer, went to a Simagic M10 wheel, direct drive wheel, and now I'm using a Simagic Alpha direct drive wheel. And I have very nostalgic memories of the Logitech. One of the things that I was worried about was that it wasn't going to live up to my mental expectations. The last thing I was expecting was that it would actually surpass those expectations. I can't explain it. Hopefully somebody in the comments can explain it. I'm not that technical when it comes to these things. I leave that up to the Barry Rowlands and the Will Fords of the world. I like to enjoy my equipment, and I like to share my experience with you so that you can kind of get a sense of what this equipment is like before you commit to buying it. I'm going to leave you with the settings that I'm using for the G923. For when you get yours, you can hit the ground running. I'll just take a second as well to say that 70% of the people who watch these videos aren't actually subscribed. So if you like this content, if this was useful for you, or if the settings are useful for you, please do hit subscribe. I really appreciate it. And when my videos come up, I appreciate when you give them a thumbs up, and I especially appreciate when you give a comment below. I try to respond to all the comments, so I will be responding to the comment that you put below. That's it for me. I'm Lawrence. Thanks a million for watching. Chat to you later. So here we have a quick look at the settings for the G923. If we go into Logitech Hub here, we can go into the G923 settings, go into steering wheel on the left hand side. We want to operate at the full 900 degrees. Sensitivity, I like it at 80. Try it around 50. This doesn't make a massive amount of difference. It just felt quite good at 80. Centering spring strength, you don't actually change until you check this box, but you don't want to check that box. And apply settings from game, very important. So we'll just jump over to the Assetto Corsa Content Manager settings. If you haven't used Content Manager, if you don't use Content Manager, do consider using it, because it's a really nice interface, and it's way better than the original Assetto Corsa launcher. So here in your settings, Assetto Corsa and controls, you want to go to the axis and you want to make sure that your gamma is at 1. Steering degrees, of course, is at 900. Your scale is at 100, and filter and speed sensitivity both at 0. Then go straight over to the force feedback tab, and in there you want your gain at 100, filter at 0, and your minimum force is all the way up at 30. It might seem a bit strange. If I tried that with my Logitech G27, it would have clipped all over the place and just been rattly the second you leave the pits. But with this wheel it works. Curb effect 40, road effect 25, and slip and ABS for drifting, I just leave those off. I turn off the enhanced understeer effect, and the soft lock is on. Now the most remarkable thing I guess here is that we don't have a LUT file like we would have had with the G27 and the G920 and G29. You would have processed the LUT file. Now you can see this graph is kind of weird. With the older wheels, it would have been a much more stable graph. So I'm not 100% sure what the story is there. Long story short, you don't need it. If you don't know what a LUT file is, don't even worry about it. Doesn't matter. And that's really all there is to it. Happy drifting.